I've heard many assumptions about damage caps and legendary items in Dead Cells. Do legendary items actually allow you to somehow bypass the damage caps that exist in the game? What about stories of people one-shotting bosses? I have had similar questions of my own and decided to do some experimentation. To test the damage caps, I set up a run where I had a ton of scrolls. Weapons are dealing tens or hundreds of millions of damage per hit, so if there's a damage cap, I will find it with numbers this large. Let's start with something simple, the Hand of the King. A legendary marksman bow I found will be the test weapon. The boss's HP bar is roughly 1,428 pixels across. The first close range hit with the bow deals about 211 pixels of damage, and the second hit does another 211 pixels of damage. This corresponds to approximately 15% of the boss's health in a single hit. Getting further away from the hand allows for a critical damage ranged shot, which again deals about 15% of the boss's health. The close range shot dealt around 30 million damage. The critical distance shot dealt around 250 million. Clearly, the bow is not actually bypassing the damage cap at all, and the Hand of the King has a 15% damage cap limit. This affects all individual hits and ticks of damage. How about a different weapon? Here's a Ferryman's Lantern. A normal 100 million damage hit deals about 15% damage, while a fire arrow on attack weapon affix that fires an additional arrow on using the lantern fires a 17 million damage arrow on the next frame that again takes about 15% of the boss's health off. What about a non-legendary weapon? These magic missiles do 15% damage every hit, with the exception of the one arrow firing weapon affix that manages to land for an additional 15% damage. How about a pet? It certainly looks like this owl is breaking the damage cap of the boss, but in actuality, it is just hitting the damage cap with a quick firing projectile that is also applying poison. The boss is taking 2 hits of roughly 15% damage each on a single frame, so it looks like the damage is higher than the cap. It should be noted though that it doesn't look like the poison is actually doing a full 15% of damage, it's more like 12%. So the poison is not enough damage to reach the damage cap of the boss. An angered owl does the same thing, it just fires much faster. It's not actually breaking the damage cap, it's just applying the damage so quickly that the boss melts regardless. How about the grappling hook? Well, there's no apparent effect on damage output. It still appears that the shots are limited to 15% damage per hit. Other bosses seem to have the same damage cap. Concierge is 15% per hit, regardless of weapon used. And the Timekeeper as well. The Watcher is an interesting one. The main body itself is limited to 15% damage per hit, but the tentacles have a limit of 50% per instance of damage, so you can two-shot the tentacles at worst. Apparently though, due to rounding, sometimes the tentacles will live with what looks like 1 HP, so a third follow-up shot is sometimes needed to take them out. Just to confirm, the Giant as well has a 50% damage cap on the hands. Even a legendary whistle doing 200 million damage per hit only deals 50% damage to the hand. The Eye still seems like it has a 15% damage cap per hit. One common claim to bypass the damage cap is to parry the bombs thrown by the Hand of the King. What I believe to be happening here is that absolutely massive damage can be reflected back upon the hand if you equip and use a parry shield, since the parry shield replicates bombs and projectiles that are parried. The hand throws about a dozen bombs, so if you use the Armadillo Pack mutation, you can just scoop up all of the bombs, toss them back at him. The damage done here is significant, but each bomb does not bypass the damage cap. Instead, there are just a lot of bombs. Here is one theory that I just heard about. Perhaps the burst damage from 5 bleed stacks would break the damage cap. Well, let's set up a test and find out. For this test, I've edited the throwing knives to have absurd DPS and duration of their bleeds. One knife does 16,000 DPS for 1,000 seconds, or 16 million damage total. 5 knives should deal about 80 million burst bleed damage. And the Rampart shield has also been edited to provide prolonged invincibility during this test, since it will be against the BC5 Hand of the King with low health. I'm doing this test in this fashion instead of just giving myself a lot of scrolls, because honestly it's just faster. The test starts with a single parry to enable the invincibility. I'll be invincible for the rest of the fight. Throwing one knife shows you the overall DPS of the knife, which is noticeable. It appears that this one knife would do enough damage to kill the boss on its own if given enough time. But upon stacking 5 knives, the total burst damage is pretty much spot on, exactly 15% of the boss's health. A single burst of 80 million damage from the bleed does not bypass the damage cap.